Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. I think we're ready to begin now. I appreciate it.
Great.
Honorable ministers, excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning from New York, and good afternoon and good evening to those joining us from around the world. My name is Heather Ibrahim Leathers, President of the Global Fund for Widows, and it is my greatest honor today to moderate this historic side event on widowhood, empowerment, and the path to public life. Global Fund for Widows is the world's largest NGO working to empower widows, having economically empowered 20,000 widows, sustained 52,000 of their children, and served some 5.3 million meals to widows during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our core focus is founded in the simple golden rule. She who has the gold makes the rules. And so our main initiative is to provide financial inclusion for widows through the implementation of our proprietary microbank innovation, the Widows Savings and Loan Association, or WISALA for short. We have witnessed the impact of the WISALA intervention, its economic empowerment on widows, and its catalytic effect in paving a path for public life. Despite best intentions, 40% of widows are disinherited from rightful properties, 44% are subjected to violent customary burial and cleansing rites, and 90% experienced institutionalized discrimination. And these practices continue with impunity. Yet widows remain left out of every narrative, including the scandalous omission from the CSW65 agreed conclusions, despite their insertion by the indefatigable Sierra Leone, the unanimous vote of the Africa Group, the best efforts of the United Kingdom, and even now the United States, which until last night had once again reintroduced widowhood into the draft for the third time. I believe today, however, this changes. We are humbled to convene a panel of the world's pioneers in this emerging human rights movement. You will see that they are about to offer a seismic shift in the course of this movement and the fate of the world's 300 million widows and the 600 million of their children. It would be impossible for me to do justice to the illustrious and impressive accomplishments of today's speakers, and so I invite you to view their detailed bios, which are available on the Global Fund for Widows website. I am first and foremost grateful to our gracious host for this side event, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Ali Kaba, Permanent Representative of the Mission of Sierra Leone to the United Nations. Ambassador Kaba is a longtime defender of human rights, a seasoned diplomat, and the current executive board president for UN Women, as well as chair of the G7+. Adding to his impressive list of titles is one of special interest to today's discussion, as Ambassador Kaba is the world's first and only global goodwill ambassador for widows in peace and security. He has committed his mission and country to lead the change in international law to protect widows in conflict and post-conflict contexts forever. Your Excellency, I join the world in thanking you for your leadership and invite you to offer opening statements for today's side event.
Thank you, Heather. Honorable ministers, excellencies, dear colleagues. Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. It is an honor to be with you today for this long overdue discussion. In my capacity as permanent representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations, I have the privileged duty of representing a great country that is deeply familiar with the theme of our discussions today. My beloved country is recovering from a devastating conflict that was the proximate cause of the creation of uncounted numbers of widows. During our delicate recovery from conflict, we were ravaged by the Ebola epidemic and now by the tragic widow-making impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, left unaided, faced with extreme poverty, marginalization, and exposure to violence, widows across the world have been left behind for too long. We know that the neglect of widows damages the very core of society, as young women are robbed of opportunity and their children grow up in poverty without fathers, vulnerable to criminal and extremist indoctrination, child marriage, and the reprehensible phenomenon of the child widow, a tragic intergenerational cycle set in motion every time a widow is left behind. Yet their plight remains invisible, with not a single resolution protecting widows in the UN General Assembly or UN Human Rights Council. And despite the scores of widows left in the wake of global conflicts, they have yet to even be acknowledged by the UN Security Council. In my capacity as the Global Goodwill Ambassador for Widows in Peace and Security, Ambassador to the United Nations, President of the UN Women Executive Board, and Chair of the G7+, I reiterate my pledge of unwavering support for widows around the world, especially those surviving conflicts or recovering from the devastation caused by natural disasters, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Now is the time for a resolution, a seminal resolution, on the floor of the United Nations that will forever change international law, protect, promote, and advance widows' fundamental human rights, to give widows and their children rights and protections, and end the human rights violations that they endure every day. With the world's support and elimination of antiquated discriminatory attitudes, which have held them back for so long, widows may finally find their path and their voice. Their empowerment can finally lead to economic inclusion and stability. With stability and dignified work, SDG 8, widows will ensure the safety and education of their children, thereby achieving SDG 4. These actions result in the protection of their daughters from the vulnerability of child marriage, SDG 5, and their sons from extremist or criminal recruitment, SDG 10. Widows will improve the health, SDG 3, and nutrition, SDG 2, of their families. So, as we look at all of this, no longer will they be forced to suffer from such disproportionate levels of disease and hunger. As the world's most vulnerable widows extricate themselves from poverty, achieving SDG 1, they begin to turn toward their community. They invest in other women, provide scholarships for children, volunteer alongside their community leaders, advocate for political leaders, and yes, even successfully run for elective offices. This is the path to public life. Today, we must bear witness that some of the world's greatest experts and advocates of widows among us here today, who are empowering women to achieve the full enjoyment of public life, are deeply committed to this cause. The honorable ministers of gender of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Kenya are dedicated to this cause and have created pioneering programming to empower widows and place them on the path to public life. I congratulate Minister Traore on her historic work this past year with the launching of Sierra Leone's first ever gender equality and women's empowerment policy. Minister Sedita on her internationally renowned work to end gender-based violence and protect vulnerable households during the pandemic, and Minister Kobia for her outstanding effort to support widows and her recent pledge to review and strengthen Kenya's legal protections. And to the Executive Director of UN Women, Madame Fuzile Lambokuke, for committing the power of UN Women to backing this cause. Ambassador Idris, my good brother, hosted the first ever Widowhood side event at CSW63, has been a longtime champion of widowhood issues at the UN, Egypt, and beyond. It is the work of selfless public servants such as yourselves that gives us hope for a better future. Mary Ellen Iskandari is the world's leader in economically empowering women through financial inclusion. On this note, I wish to thank our moderator, the hardworking Ms. Heather Ibrahim Ledis, who has always inspired all of us here to keep the faith against tremendous odds. President of the Global Fund for Widows, a real pioneering force and visionary behind this movement. I look forward to working with all of you today to create a better future for widows everywhere. Thank you, merci, shukran, gracias, shishi, spasiba. Over to you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your powerful welcome and your groundbreaking commitment to bringing forth a resolution to protect widows on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly. This is indeed a seismic shift, and we're only 15 minutes into our session. And so I thank you. It is now my great pleasure and privilege to welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Minister Manti Tarawali, the Republic of Sierra Leone's Minister for Gender and Children's Affairs. Minister Tarawali has dedicated her ministry to changing the narrative around gender and children's issues in Sierra Leone through the informed policy formulation that you have just heard, and the creation of pioneering programs geared towards achieving the country's current development plan. She's also leading her country to address the issue of widowhood, and not only for the Republic of Sierra Leone, but around the world. Honorable Minister, we welcome you to offer the keynote address.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Colleague ministers from Kenya and Liberia, event host, our esteemed permanent representative to the United Nations, Executive Director of UN Women, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Sierra Leone. It is my pleasure to deliver the keynote address on the theme, Widowhood, Empowerment, and Path to Public Life. I extend warm greetings from the Republic of Sierra Leone, especially from His Excellency President Dr. Julius Maada Bio, one of the greatest he-for-she champions of our times. As host of this event, of this important virtual side event, we're extremely elated at the level of participation. I see ministers, ambassadors, and very strong activists for the issue of widowhood. We are very much encouraged to have you all at this event, as this issue is very dear to our hearts. Sierra Leone is committed to the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women. As a state party, we have signed and ratified international and regional instruments on women and gender, including but not limited to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the AU Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, amongst others. To domesticate some of these substantive issues contained in the normative frameworks, we have developed policies and legislations, including but not limited to the National Policy on the Advancement of Women, National Policy on Gender Mainstreaming, adoption of the recently launched Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Policy, passage of the gender justice laws, especially the Devolution of Essex Act, Domestic Violence Act, and an all-important and quite innovative registration of Customary Marriage and Divorce Act. In truth, Sierra Leone's Progressive Devolution of Estates Act provides for a clear path to inheritance for widows and their children. In addition to the above intervention, government through the social protection programs implemented by the National Commission for Social Action provides social protection services to vulnerable categories, including widows, the aged, and single parents, amongst others. My government has made conscious effort to provide the enabling environment for the well-being of vulnerable categories, including widows and the aged. The Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Policy points out that the daily experiences of widows, older women, and single women are even worse as they suffer discrimination and inequalities, not only because on gender, but on their social status as well. It further calls on the creation and implementation of specific policies and programs to cater for widows, older persons, orphans, women and children with disability, and especially women affected by the Ebola virus. The GIWI policy further alludes to the fact that amongst persons with special needs are widows and aged women. Like most developing countries, Sierra Leone does not have any specific policy and formal mechanisms to cater for older persons. They're usually catered for by the extended family system. Most widows, on the other hand, either suddenly become household heads or depend on their eldest male children to head the family. As we move the processes for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals with the principle of leaving no one behind, we in Sierra Leone articulated the medium-term National Development Plan with a whole cluster on empowering women, children, and persons with disability. These were aligned with the SDGs and other normative frameworks. And so we are now creating the enabling environment for all our citizens, including vulnerable persons. It is our intention to ensure that widows are spotlighted in the National Development Goals and mainstreamed in the normative frameworks. To this end, it is the intention of my ministry to ensure that no woman nor widow is left behind. To effect this landmark change, I would like to announce the commencement of the following domestic initiatives from my office. 1, the establishment of a national widowhood register. This will allow my office to identify and count widows throughout Sierra Leone. In identifying their needs, the age they were widowed, and their experiences regarding disinheritance, discrimination, or harmful traditional practices, I will be able to develop and promote policies to uniquely serve their needs whilst establishing a body of best practices from which we can mainstream a national and global response. 2, further, by understanding their needs, the needs of widows, my ministry will propose various social protection measures, including the possibility of establishing an affirmative action employment plan in public-private partnerships and school bursaries for children to remain in school, whereby protecting daughters from child marriage and child widowhood and sons from criminal and extremist recruitment. 3, moreover, I will look to provide space for widows to participate politically in local and national government and join in financial inclusion mechanisms. 4, I will also look to ensure that the good acts and policies in place are faithfully implemented. So on the global sphere, I will continue to lead with my ministerial colleagues gathered here today on mainstreaming widowhood as a human rights crisis that must be addressed at all levels of government, nationally and internationally. Work with my foreign office and mission in New York for the introduction and ratification of a United Nations resolution in the General Assembly protecting widows around the world. I strongly believe that implementation of such policies will sustain women and children in my country and build a foundation for achieving the SDGs, not only in Sierra Leone, but also the world. Lastly, it is clear that the time has come for widows of all ages to be acknowledged by the global community as a vulnerable and marginalized group. It is time that they are accorded the honor and respect they deserve as women, wives, mothers, daughters, and most of all, valuable citizens of country and of humanity. It is no longer acceptable that they suffer from the sin of omission. It is no longer acceptable that they are left behind. I thank you for your attention.
Honorable Minister, I think I'm being moved to tears. Thank you for your very powerful intervention and for the commitment that your ministry has just made to widows, including them in the registry, providing social protections, and then further to supporting a seminal resolution with Ambassador Kaba and your Foreign Office, for which we will work hand in hand with you. I'm humbled and we are grateful. The entire international community is humbled and grateful. Thank you. Our cornerstone address this morning will be offered by the Minister of Gender, Children, and Social Protection of the Republic of Liberia, the Honorable Williametta Sadie Tarr. Minister Sadie Tarr is a seasoned practitioner of human rights defense, having been a protector of peace and public life as a member of Liberia's police force, to protecting peace and justice as the first executive director of Nobel Peace Prize laureates Lima Bowie Peace Foundation Africa. Minister Sadie Tarr is a visionary and dedicated to addressing the issue of widowhood in her country and beyond, and it is a privilege to welcome her today. Honorable Minister, the floor is yours. May we ask you to...
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody from wherever you are. Indeed, very pleased to be here. Very honored to be here. First, I just want to acknowledge Ambassador Ali Kaba, permanent resident of Sierra Leone to the United Nations and a Goodwill Ambassador for Widows in Peace and Security. The Honorable Manti Tarwali, my own dear sister and colleague minister of the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs of Sierra Leone, the Executive Director of UN Women, Ambassador Mohammed Andries, and a representative of Egypt to the United Nations, and all others on here today. I'm very, very happy to be a part of this forum. It's something that is very topic that is at hand. This is a historical panel, so I'm indeed happy to be a part of it. Thanks to all those who spoke before me. The issue of widowhood is something that is very important and germane to our own existence, especially as we are about leaving no one behind. And in everything that we do as to fulfill SDGs, widows of our various countries are very important and should be part of the conversation, should be a part of the way that we're taking for each and every one of our countries as regards women's empowerment and protection. As it regards the changes here in my own country now, just make it, bring it locally a little bit. In our country, we have one group of widows that are known around the country. They are called the AFL widows. AFL is our Armed Forces of Liberia. Obviously, we all that were in the Civil War for years. And these are widows of the soldiers of the National Army of Liberia at that time. And they, after the war, they came together and tried to consolidate in order to be able to have a united front and move forward in requesting for benefits that were due them as regarded the pension that should have come to their families based off of their lost loved ones. This has for years for benefits. Other gender ministers before me had worked with them. And once I came in, I did work with them because there were some years that we were fighting for in terms of being able to financial pensions that had left behind. We also are knowledgeable that we have widows all over our country, but we do not have a consolidated unit of a group that really pays attention to widowhood. But what I want to say is that we do need it because traditionally, for example, when a woman is widowed, one of the things that happen here is that the males in the family become in terms of taking the property of their brother who had passed away. And we do have in some parts of our country a tradition, you as a widow are even asked to marry the brother of your lost loved one, and in order to stay within the family. So if you do that, then you can stay within the family, your children are protected, you are protected. If you do not do that, of course, you will be faced with serious, serious fight there will be a just for, especially for property. And so those are things that we know that we need to be able to work with widows in order to protect them, because women should be able to have property, should be able to inherit property. The good part is our president himself, having, named himself the feminist in chief, really pays attention to things concerning women. And we're happy that we're able to this law, which, is prevalence law, whereas now it gave women the right to because of course, having law on paper and having law is implemented are two different things. And so we are really working to ensure that women really have the advantage that they need to have. The other thing that happens is that we try our best to institute the social protection part of our job, because and we know that we need to be sure that women are empowered. I know that in other places where you heard about the Kenya model, where there's where we reference as VSL, so it's the Village Saving Loans, where I think comparable to what's happening in Kenya, where women were able to come together and create their own savings and all of that. We had for widows, but we also realize that it's important because they are a group that need to have attention to. We need to train them so that first of all they understand their rights. We need to be able to ensure that they understand their rights, to ensure that they know that, if they lose their husband, they have a right as human beings to be able to go to the demands of the state for what is due to them. So we want to make sure we can train them. There's a situation around stigmatization. We need to ensure that widows do not suffer from, because widows, being with us means you're not a full part of the community, that you cannot, take part in all manner of life that the community provides. So we want to be sure that we're working hand in hand with our civil society organization, our traditional women, our rural women, and just the government as a whole, to ensure that we're able to now start paying attention to this group. Minister Tarawali about her own launch of the National Widowhood Registry. And this is something that I definitely, after having learned about a little bit and done research once I was approached about being a part of this panel, it's something that I'm very interested in. So definitely we'll be pushing for that year in Liberia also, to ensure that we can establish a National Widowhood Registry, so that we're able to definitely account for our women. Because one of the things that once I started, I spoke with Heather, and my permanent representative officer in touch, and thinking how do we really determine what is the population that is out there? Of course, we had our wars. We all understand during the course of the war, there were women who were left behind, and there was from all sides. About the freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them. And even right now, there are women who are left behind because of COVID. There are women who are left behind because of Ebola, the Ebola disease, and they are left, and women are left with their children to take care of. So you have to think about how do you take care of those children, how do you feed them, how do you take them through school, college, and ensure that they become, people of worth in the society. So we're very happy to be a part of this. And my own administration, already ahead. So from Kenya, my sister colleague here. And I hope that Manti will be able to reach out to our colleague ministers in Guinea and the Ivory Coast, so that it becomes a Mano River Union effort that even just here within can work, even try level. The other thing that I want to say is that at the end of the day, we're all trying to ensure that it stays in the agreed conclusion. I think widowhood in the context of conflict and COVID, and just, the fact that the African group unanimously approved it, says a lot to us in Africa, knowing the reason why it's important that we do this. A lot of us have mothers who are widows. Our fathers died. My mother has been a widow for almost all of my life, so I know how hard it was, her struggling to take care of me and my siblings and just help in the community, and how hard it was. Even apart from that, you become vulnerable to the society in terms of that men are now trying their best to get at you because by they feel that there's no other males around to protect you. I want to take advantage of you. So we want to be sure that we're able to definitely work on that and that have the would include we include her language was rejected and was kicked out, you know, even though USA and in the UN or Switzerland, Australia countries approve of the second, you know, phrasing. But since then, we have not heard about approval, and I hope that this is something we can all push for. That I just want to say that we don't have enough approximately everything they do, obviously, you know, is about making sure that they can fend for themselves and their family. So from our end in Liberia here, like I said, we do not have this secluded group, but now that this has been raising up to our attention, it's something that would definitely be to help with, you know, just micro loans. That's something that widows can definitely take advantage of. We'll be pushing and ensuring that people are aware and can understand what these opportunities are. There's opportunities within our Ministry of Agriculture that's been having $16+ million. Is going to be upward of $35 million for farmers that we can definitely reach out to who are, you know, and then take advantage of the also improve the business and pay themselves, you know, and take care of the families also. So without further ado, I just want to say we are committed, you know, from the level of the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection in Liberia, work hand in hand with all of you to ensure that we can bring the necessary attention to widowhood and just, you know, their empowerment and, you know, make sure that they have to public life, that we pay attention to these people and ensure that we are pulling them along as we are all trying to accomplish the SDGs so that indeed no one will be left behind. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, indeed, for the affirmative action plans to widows in your country and to financing their development. It is indeed a powerful catalytic initiative, and for your unwavering support for language in the SDGs, in the agreed conclusions, which we continue to ask for alongside of you. And we thank you for your commitment. And of course, working together with your neighboring ministers would also be, you know, a powerful catalytic force. So thank you for your intervention. We appreciate all that you're doing for widows. As we've worked to mainstream the human rights issue of widowhood, we've been working with UN Women to bring the power of its voice to the narrative. Through the powerful advocacy of our global partners and walked in by Ambassador Kaba as in his dual role as the Global Goodwill Ambassador for Widows, as well as the Executive Board President for UN Women, it is my pleasure to welcome Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Nguka, to offer her videotaped remark.
Excellencies, Ambassador Kaba, and President of UN Women Executive Board, Global Fund for Widows, thank you for involving me in this important discussion on the violation of rights of widows, which is a global phenomenon. Just like women who are in unions where there are no children, or women who never marry. Widows are also discriminated against. Their property is grabbed, their inheritance stolen, the custody of their children becomes an issue, and of course, they are even forced to marry family members after their husbands have died. It is important that we address these issues and make sure that there's a policy and a legal environment for women to have recourse, but especially an environment and norms to prevent this phenomena. Our discussions today must help the many member states who confront these issues, and they must help us to address these issues at a national as well as international level. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Malembo. Widows around the world are hopeful and grateful for your powerful support of this cause. It is now my privilege to welcome my own ambassador, Dr. Mohammed Idris of the Mission of Egypt to the United Nations. Ambassador Idris is the first to host a side event at the United Nations on widowhood during CSW63 and was the first to introduce widowhood language in the CSW63 agreed conclusions. He has been a driving force behind widowhood empowerment, both in our beloved homeland of Egypt and at the United Nations. Your Excellency, Ambassador Idris, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, dear Heather. Very proud of you and with engagement with your efforts, committed, dedicated efforts.
Merci.
Allow me to start by, and shukran jazilan, Heather. Allow me to start by welcoming and appreciating the interventions and presentations, the valuable presentations by honorable ministers, Minister Manti from Sierra Leone, Minister William Meta from Liberia, and my dear brother, Ambassador, the Women Empowerment Defender, Ambassador Ali Kaba. He's a goodwill ambassador, but he's good in everything, goodwill in so many aspects and endeavors in the United Nations. So appreciated to be with you, my dear brother. And really, Heather, you are really a person with such commitment, dedication, and the energizing power. So appreciate and proud with what you are doing with your colleagues. And happy CSW. And I'd like to thank Sister Sierra Leone and Sister Liberia for organizing this event in order to shed the important light on this valuable subject and the highly vital one of the empowerment of widows and their participation in the public life. Allow me also to address a special thanks to the Global Fund for Widows and our dear moderator, Heather Ibrahim, for the tireless efforts in bringing this issue to discussion within the United Nations. And I am really honored to continue engaging with this important cause and to join force with all of you to support these noble efforts. Heather really is doing a great job, and I was honored and pleasure to engage with this endeavor years ago, as she mentioned, and to participate in person in the previous events. Glad to participate now virtually, pending our comeback to the old normal, hopefully sometime soon. It is really unfortunate that the empowerment of widows is not usually sufficiently discussed in the UN documents. But we are confident that with our perseverance together, the situation of widows will be brought to the center, not only of discussions, but also of our collective action. Because at the end, this is what matters, is to have actions on the ground. Reports are showing that the numbers of widows are growing. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, had big impact on all our aspects of life, including also this important dimension. The Global Fund for Widows report has described that COVID-19 as a widow-making machine, unfortunately. Immediate action must be taken to ensure that widows in our societies are not unseen or unsupported. Social protection policies should be tailored around them. And our economic recovery plan should also address their status and take it in due consideration. In this regard, let me present a positive experience which I would like to share from Egypt. In 2015, Egypt, with the support of the World Bank, launched a program called in Arabic, Takaful and Karama, meaning in English, solidarity and dignity, which is a social safety net program. That program, implemented by the Ministry of Social Solidarity, provides family income support aimed at increasing food consumption, reducing poverty, while encouraging families to keep children in school and providing them with needed health care. And of course, major beneficiaries of this program are widows. It is estimated that 75% of beneficiaries of this program are women, and that widows occupy a significant percentage of those women beneficiaries. The Ministry of Social Solidarity is also using this program as a database to link the beneficiaries to other social protection services that promote literacy, decent housing, and well-being. And here the importance of interlinkages between our endeavors in the society. All of them are feeding each other, affecting each other, and impacting each other. This program showed so far positive outcomes related to women's empowerment and sense of dignity, with less financial stress on them since the start of the pandemic. And in order to face its negative impacts, the Ministry of Social Solidarity decided to expand this important program to include additional 100,000 new households. It is also important to mention that Egypt developed a policy paper in response to women's needs during the pandemic. That was very early in the pandemic, conducted by the Supreme Council of Women in Egypt. That policy paper provided a holistic approach regarding the governmental policies mitigating the COVID-19 impacts on women, girls, and also especially on widows and female households, that elderly and the persons with disabilities. We believe that more has to be done internationally, regionally, and nationally. And here I think these endeavors, these collective endeavors, which we are hearing different voices around the world, and especially in this very important occasion of CSW, it's important to share experiences, share lessons, and also mobilize further action-oriented efforts on the ground. And we believe that these additional efforts are much needed to assure that the widow's status is included in our discussions and the outcomes of our high-level meetings, and that enough measures are taken to address their special situation. Allow me once again to thank the organizers of this event for giving this important subject the visibility it needs during this session of CSW. And I would like once again to express our support to all your dedicated efforts and your noble goals. Again, Heather, thank you very much. Very proud of you, and really happy that you are sending also this message to your people in Egypt who are following you, are supporting your efforts, and are so proud of you and your efforts and your colleagues. Thank you very much. It's a great honor and a pleasure to join this noble goal. Best wishes. Happy. Yes, happy. Thank you.
Merci, Hollis. Ambassador Idris, you are definitely our partner and one of our leaders in this cause. Thank you always for your unwavering support and for the wonderful work that Egypt is doing on the issue of widowhood. Egypt has 34% of its female population widowed, and that is without war. And so it gives a sense of just how dedicated Egypt has been in the forefront of this issue by offering social protections, creating the database and leveraging that database to address additional needs of widows. The commitment of our ministry, both social solidarity and of our National Women's Council, as well as Ambassador Idris, is felt daily in the field. And so we're grateful for your commitment. When discussing the issue of widowhood, empowerment, and their path to returning to public life, it's critical that we take under consideration not only the policy initiatives from the top down that we've heard of this morning from our honorable guests and ministers and ambassadors, but also the powerful evidence of economic empowerment initiatives from the field. Undoubtedly, one of the world's greatest operatives in women's financial inclusion and empowerment is Mary Ellen Iskandarian, who's raised over $75 million in 2020 alone, during a global pandemic, I may add, and is well on her way to empowering 100 million women as the CEO of Women's World Banking. A mind for business, a heart for philanthropy, Mrs. Skandarian sits at the leading edge of catalyzing women and widows to participate in the formal sector and in public life. Mrs. Skandarian, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Heather, thank you so much for including me today. I have been so inspired by all of the speakers who've gone before me, and I confess that there were so many issues that I had never really understood as being so closely linked with the work that Women's World Banking is doing more broadly in financial inclusion. In a very real sense, we're trying to make women's work, women's motivation for saving, for investing, for spending. We're trying to take that work, which most of the world either doesn't think of or that it's invisible to the world, and make it visible. And I'm so struck by how similar that is to the work that you're deeply engaged in. So I was asked a few questions. I'd be delighted to make a shift in our remarks if that's helpful, but perhaps I can say a little bit about what Women's World Banking does in the context of financial inclusion and where that plays into women's economic empowerment more broadly. We are a more than 40-year-old NGO that since our founding has been focused on providing access to financial products and services to low-income women in developing countries so that they can achieve both that important security, but also benefit from prosperity as well. And I think we've always had a keen understanding that financial inclusion really isn't necessarily an end in itself, but it is such an important means of so much other change. And as we take steps towards inclusion, whether it be by having a woman achieve a formal identification, or whether she has access to a cell phone for the first time to make a digital transfer, or so many of the things that come with a step towards financial inclusion is an equally important step towards that broader visibility, that move into the formal economy, and that visibility that we've been talking about. I think specifically in the case of widows, we have, and I'm afraid the ambassador's phrase of the COVID-19 being a widowmaker is going to stay with me throughout the day. But we've seen even prior to the COVID-19 epidemic that the number of female headed households has dramatically increased. And so I would just encourage those of you, as you turn your attention to important topics such as social protection, for example, that we not necessarily default to a payment into a head of household account, or just assume that the wage earner in the family is the one that social protection payment should be made to, but really look at some of the dramatic evidence that happens when a payment is made directly into a woman's account. The chances that those funds will be used for the greater benefit of her family, her community, are significantly increased if that payment is directed to her. We saw in India during the pandemic really quite an extraordinary case. India and Peru were the only two countries that explicitly directed social protection payments to women. And so you saw in India, where they had put a tremendous infrastructure for financial inclusion in place, with a universal biometric identification and a mandatory sort of no frills bank account had already been established, but the bank account was targeted to households. And then we know that when we collect data on households, we're not necessarily measuring what happens to the two very different, and sometimes more than two very different people and genders in that household. And so unfortunately, what had happened is so many of those household accounts were held by men. So we come to the COVID pandemic, the Indian government makes their social protection payment to women, and you had literally in a 2-week period, 25 million new bank accounts opened by women to facilitate those payments. And so from where women's world banking is sitting, and the way that we're engaging now is, now that we have these women in the formal sector, now that they have that formal identification, they have that formal bank account, how do we keep them in the sector? So I feel it's an exciting moment, but now the job is back on us to make sure that we keep them included once we've brought them into the economy. I think we've talked, several folks have talked about property rights as being just absolutely essential to bringing widows into the economy, making sure that when they are widowed, that they are treated fairly. But we know again that there's another very important economic benefit to improving property rights and understanding that property can be titled in more than one name, for example, and that ownership of that asset can be so very important. The vast majority of banks around the world require collateral to be pledged against a loan. So there's an enormous economic benefit that comes along with that granting of property rights, in addition to all of the fairness and equality and important life moment events that we've been talking about this morning. So just to reiterate that point, financial inclusion doesn't come alone just with that opening of that bank account, but brings with it so many of the other things that we're striving for women in general and widows in particular. I was asked also to talk a little bit about how do we prove that we're actually having an impact on women's lives? And I think this was a subject of tremendous debate, tremendous discussion within Women's World Banking and all of its 56 financial sector partners around the world. Just counting the numbers is not sufficient. And so we worked with an economist many of you know from the ILO and Harvard, Marty Chen, to adapt an empowerment framework that she had created several years ago to measure how might financial services impact women's economic empowerment. And we looked at in the context of 4 types of changes that a woman might go through as she becomes economically included. The first, probably the easiest one, was there a material change? Did she have more income coming into her house? Was she able to acquire more assets? So were there tangible material changes? Were her children, more of her children in school? Were their nutrition higher? So those very tangible, measurable things. The next, and I think we've touched on the issue of awareness in our conversation this morning. The next one is really around skills and awareness. Did the woman learn anything? Did she become aware of additional skills, of being able to do more with the assets that she may have acquired? We're seeing that while there may actually be a technology gap, and indeed there are 300 million fewer cell phones are owned by women than by men, but even when that woman gets that phone in her hand, she doesn't necessarily have the digital skills to use that phone for all of the economic and financial benefits that it might yield. So does she improve her awareness? And then the last two types of changes I think are some of the most inspiring. The third is relational. How does that acquisition of a financial service or interaction with a financial service provider, how does that change her in terms of her negotiating in the household and with her family members, something that I think would be particularly germane to our topic here today? Is she more likely to vote? Is she more likely to stand for political office herself? We've seen some fascinating work. I know we have representatives from Bangladesh here. We've seen some really fascinating research done on women's willingness to actually stand for election in village councils once they have actively become savers and borrowers from microfinance institutions. And then the last, and probably the most important, but often the most difficult to measure, is what about the woman's sense of herself? Is she able to start to plan, to dream, to think beyond that day-to-day life? Has her self-esteem changed or improved in any way? And so I'm happy to say, and I'll just wrap up quickly, that we now use this framework as essentially the monitoring and evaluation basis for all of the work that we're doing globally. And so we're tracking whether the woman in Jordan who has acquired an insurance policy along with her microfinance loan, is she empowered? And we've heard the women say, now my husband has to talk to me because I'm the one that receives the payment if one of our children is sick or he is sick because I have the policy in my name. Or the Nigerian women, I mean, my experience of Nigerian women is that they've never had any difficulty standing up for themselves and arguing to be a member of any household decision. But we saw when we implemented a savings account in their own name, they felt 5 years later that their input into decision-making was not only more active on their part, but that the other members of their family were actually listening to and acting on those decisions. So I could talk about this for the rest of the afternoon, and I'm so looking forward to our other speakers, but I would really encourage you as we build out this agenda to remember the important role that financial inclusion can play in all of the other objectives that you're seeking for women and widows worldwide. Thank you so much, Heather, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Indeed, I love the 4 points that you have made in terms of monitoring and evaluation and evaluating the empowerment that's derived from financial inclusion. As we say at Global Fund for Widows, and I think we started by saying that we found everything in the golden rule. She who has the gold makes the rules. And we see that play out every single day successfully, including having widows become participants in public life. So thank you, Mary Ellen, for all that you're doing for women around the world, and with the widow's lens now for widows as well. I'm very grateful for your participation here today. This segues nicely into our next speaker, who is one near and dear to me personally. Diana Kamande survived her husband's brutal murder attempt to find herself a widow. Since then, she launched Kenya's most powerful grassroots-based movement and has harnessed the power of her government behind her. In the field, she and her team have established nearly 50 of the Global Fund for Widows Wisala microbanks, impacting 1,000 widows and working towards addressing the 15,000 widows that have placed themselves on our Wasala waitlist. Widows who were once disinherited, discriminated against, victims of unspeakable violence, quite literally relegated to sleeping with their children on the roadside after being evicted from their homes, are now owners of laundromats, grain mills, even computer centers, all as a result of our wasalas. Over 750 widows have downed their FGM tools and abandoned their forced jobs as cutters, and are now building back their lives in businesses such as livestock, just because of our microbank intervention. Others have been empowered to access justice by pursuing their cases in court, and others yet are becoming community leaders, and as of this morning, officially seeking position in government. My sister Diana, thank you for the inspiring work that you do. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Heather, and everybody who is here. I'm so much honored to listen to all the amazing speakers who have spoken ahead of me, and also waiting to hear from the remaining speakers, and more so our cabinet secretary, who has really been very instrumental in what we do and our government. I'll just say all protocols observed because of time. And I will start briefly by telling you what inspires me to work for widows. I became a widow in 2013 when my husband came back home and he was ready to kill everybody in the house. When he realized that I did not die, he turned the sword to himself. This is how I started knowing what is a widow, who is a widow, and what a widow goes through. On my hospital bed, I remember I started receiving phone calls. I could get text messages. You are a murderer. Your in-laws have already broken into your house and carried everything. You did not give birth with our son, so my children were neglected. And I asked myself, if I've been able to go to school because my father believed in taking girls to school, because first three children in our home are girls. We have a last born, our brother is the last born. He's the only son. And my father kept on telling me that I am taking you to school because you need education. Education is freedom. And I didn't understand why. But the moment I became a widow is when I realized education is freedom, and every woman needs freedom. Freedom to choose and freedom to listen and to decide for herself. Because I was called all names. I was accused of my husband's murder to a point where my in-laws decided to move to court because they wanted me accused and charged for his murder, yet he had committed suicide. When I asked myself, how many women go through what I have gone through and they are quiet, is when I decided. I remember I told myself on my hospital bed, Diana, you must step up. Step up for women like yourself. And when I was stepping up, I was also looking for my healing because I needed to heal. So in this process of healing, I found widows like myself and others who had gone through a lot of painful situations than myself. And I always say thanks to our government, because I remember when our president elevated gender into a full state department. I went and spoke to the first PS, Principal Secretary, Gender Affairs. I respect this woman so much, Zainab Hussein. She had read my story on paper. She came to see my work with widows. She found us with widows somewhere, just having loss and grief sharing session, table banking. I'm going to explain very little about table banking, but I'm going to direct you to our website. Table banking is where women will come, save their money, borrow, and go back home. Our government believed in us, and since that time of Principal Secretary Zainab Hussein, widowhood issue was mainstreamed at the State Department for Gender. Then after 2017 elections, then we got Professor Margaret Kobia, Honorable Rachel Shebesh, and Principal Secretary who left, Safina Kwekwe, and now we have another Principal Secretary, Professor Colette Suda. This is a fully women-led ministry. It is the ministry, the only ministry that we are very, very proud of, and I keep on thanking His Excellency, our President, for making sure that this ministry is women-led. I think this is how all our widowhood issues are being understood there. And to all ministers who are here, who are women, I have had them speak, and I've had them already stepping up, because what the Minister for Sierra Leone said, she's not just speaking, she has already stepped up, and I have noted down whatever she has said, and I'm hoping to come to Sierra Leone one day and see everything implemented. So all this said and done, we have the best ministry for public service and gender, a ministry that listens to widows, and a ministry that has given a widow's path to public life. Because through this ministry, we have Affirmative Action Fund. And the Affirmative Action Fund, we have a fund known as Uwezo Fund. Uwezo means enabling. It is an enabler. It is a fund that you go, it has no interest. And as widows, we get this fund, do business, and widows are organized into groups. We have Women Enterprise Fund. We have National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Because of time, I'm not able to explain, but they are all affirmative action funds. Then in 2017, it was during summer. I am very active online, and this is how I met Heather. Wrote my first email to Heather, and we connected. And I always say, thank God and thank those who invented social media. Social media can really take somebody far. We started a conversation. I told Heather what we were doing, and she told me, you have to come to New York. I didn't know how. Then at this time, our Minister for Public Service, the current one, Professor Margaret Kobia, Honorable Shebesh, came in when we were just about to come for CSW. I remember I applied, and I was supported by our government and UN Women to attend CSW and also Global Fund for Widows. This is how our conversation started. And after that, I remember I traveled again to New York, 1st November. I remember I was the guest of honor in one of the fundraisers, the very, very, very impressive gala that Heather does at New York. And this is how we got our first funding. I'm going to give an example of one of our group. It is in Korogocho, and this group is called Vision Sisters. All our widow groups are registered as CBOs and self-help groups. So this group is the one that is the pioneer of Brook Bank. Here in Kenya, we call it stable banking, but now when we started a partnership with Global Fund for Widows, because of the long story, we call those banks Brook Bank. The widows themselves say this is a brook of water where we are going to drink more water from and even be able to give water to our children. So this first group was able to get a grant of $2,500 US. In 1 year, it had a catalyst effect. They had made themselves a profit of $5,000 US. This is because the widows they go to their mills, they mill flour, they sell, they go to the market, those who are doing green grocery, those who are doing salon, and we gave them the freedom of choice because each widow knows which business they are good at. The same widows, they are also benefiting from Women Enterprise Fund under the Ministry of Public Service, which is an affirmative action fund. They benefit from a grant, which is given by our women representative, who are the patrons of the fund. It is known as Affirmative Action Fund, and so many things that are happening. And besides that, I would also want to say, I started this work and I didn't know that even one day I would receive a head of state commendation. In 2018, I received a head of state commendation, and I was commended to the president by the same Ministry of Public Service and Gender. because they knew the work we were doing together, and I got the title HSC, which means Head of State Commendation. Last year, our Minister for Gender appointed me to sit in a board, the Anti-FGM Board. This is a board that works hard to eliminate female genital mutilation. So because I'm a board member there, I came to realize that some of our widows had embraced female genital mutilation as a source of income. And the president, when he went to Vancouver, he said FGM must end in Kenya by 2022. When I was called and I was told, now that you sit in the board, what are you going to do? We decided to offer solution. And this is how we managed to start these brook banks for women who had downed their tools, majority being widows, because I work with widows. I reached out, went down to the field, and we managed to start businesses for 60 groups of widows, most of them being in Kajiado, Samburu, and one group in Elgeyo Marakwet. So this is how we have been able to work together with our government to ensure that widows get a very good path to public life. One thing that I would like to wrap up with is, most people see widows as beggars. And I always like telling people and reminding people, because I am speaking in front of these great men and women who are holding very huge offices. I just want to tell you, widows are not beggars. My daily life is surrounded by widows. I've come to realize these are just women who are just seeking for their rights. The moment they get their rights and they're economically empowered, you'll never hear them knocking your door. You'll never see them crying, because they just need to be empowered. Let's help widows get their rights back. Let's empower them economically, because the moment they are empowered, the society will stop judging us wrongly. Together, let's make widows matter. And thank you for this forum.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for your powerful intervention and for surviving and taking your survival to inspire the survival of the 4 million other widows in Kenya. Diana came to us in that summer of 2017 and said, what should I do? And I said, find your widows. We can't solve a problem we can't see. And she went for a year, toured her country, and came back and said, we have 4 million widows. And I said, no, that's impossible. She said, yes. And so with the help of a very special person who we will hear from in a moment, she was able to run that national survey, to run that statistic and find that disaggregated data, and indeed find the 4 million widows officially. And so we can't solve a problem we can't see. And Diana, thank you for building the brook banks, for enabling those thousands of widows, along with the kind grants that we've received from some of our participants here today. Together We Rise. We're very grateful for the work that you're doing and continued work. This, of course, leads us to say that our work with Diana in Kenya would not have been made possible without the powerful hand and guiding light of the Honorable Minister of Public Service, Youth and Gender, Professor Margaret Kobia. Minister Kobia has worked quietly, almost as an angel. She crowns her halo every morning and comes to the office and creates the most enabling environment for widows, adding them to the national census in 2019, as we mentioned, clarifying inheritance and marital laws, creating social protections such as school bursaries to keep widows' children in school. Minister Kobia is not stopping there. She's instructing her ministry to create financial inclusion products for support of widows, and working with us at Global Fund for Widows to co-sponsor microbanks in her country. And I believe the Honorable Minister is only just getting started. Professor Kobia, we're honored to have you here today, and we welcome you to offer this session's capstone address.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hilda, first for inviting me. I'm very happy to participate in this particular forum. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to join you together with other distinguished guests, including the Global Goodwill Ambassador for the Windows in Peace and Security, Ambassador Ali Kaba, Public Relations of the Mission of Sierra Leone to the United Nations. I really want to appreciate all the speakers who have gone before me for the valuable input that they have put for us. And I hope at the end of this session, we'll have 3 key actions that are converging from this presentation. Today is another very important event that we put a spotlight to the long overdue issue of widows. This event marks another vital step in promoting the protection and the respect for widows' rights across all the regions and the cultures. Chairperson, worldwide, it is estimated that there are about 250 million widows, of which 10% face discrimination and extreme poverty, along with their families within growing armed conflicts, HIV/AIDS, pandemic, and other threats. These numbers are increasing. In Kenya, the government, as part of its census, through the government statistical office, we influenced them to collect disaggregated data for widows. First, we wanted, as Heather said, to know what are the numbers, who are they, what are their ages, how many children do they have, how many years they have been widowed. And as a result of that, we now have the numbers. And it's amazing that 40% are under 45. Therefore, if there are 40% of our widows are under 45 years, they are young and they have a full life ahead of them, also bringing up their children. We also found 43 of the widows of Kenya that under age of the 45 I've just mentioned, that means they are young. 40% have been disinherited of their property. That means their property has been taken in deepening the poverty. And 44% have been subjected to harmful traditional practices, such as being wife inheritance or FGM. This evidence presents an opportunity and a challenge for us to collective at a global level, region, and national to take this matter seriously and do something about it. Regarding issues that face widows in Kenya, and I'm sure globally, upon the demise of their husbands or spouse, majority of women, whether elderly or alone or young, with their dependents, become sole providers. In addition to coping with grief, they find themselves for the very first time without any social safety net, worsened in some cases by bureaucratic and cultural handles in quest to access the much needed inheritance, including the pensions left by their husbands. Additionally, widows who are already victims of deep-rooted gender inequalities are faced with disproportionate disadvantage due to their high level of unpaid care work that they perform with their children and also taking care sometimes of the elderly. Therefore, we do recognize that in widowhood is also a reminder of the importance of the many challenges that they face. And when we looked at these challenges, we realized sustainable development goals, which are very indivisible, integrated. When it comes to widows, they suffer as families on almost 12 sustainable development goals. Therefore, when we make an impact or we take action to supporting the widows or empowering the widows, you are directly supporting 12 of the sustainable development goals out of 17. These goals are touch on poverty, hunger, education, health, child marriage, human trafficking, lack of access to justice, peace, and also building strong institutions to serve. And I think that's why we support Kamande for coming up with some institutions which can provide us a structured way of supporting the widows. It is for this reason that the government of Kenya is reviewing its policy and the legislative framework to facilitate the protection and empowerment of widows, because they are marginalized category and they cannot be left behind. Therefore, making intentional reach out for the widows as already indicated that we will be improving the quality of life for themselves and their children. In recognition of the economic and social contribution of women, including widows, to our societies, the government is committed to empower women economically and strengthen their acquisition and right to land, property, and inheritance rights. We now recognize what is needed is not sympathy. What is needed is empowerment, and they'll be able to support themselves, as Diana Kamande has said. The government's policy imperative is anchored upon the following. One, recognition of widows as an integral part of the society and the obligation of the state to protect their rights. Two, emphasis on the economic empowerment of women, including widows, is critical in the eradication of poverty and ensures no one is left behind. That's why we have those affirmative fund action, because we know the critical empowerment for a woman is economic empowerment, because when you give them economic empowerment, their children can go to school, they can put food on the table, and it gives them a voice. Even if they wanted to travel somewhere and attend an empowerment program, they have money in their pocket. So for us, we have found that economic empowerment is the strongest empowerment we need to support. And that's why I was keen to listen what the banking sector is doing to provide a window for the widow to access economic some resources. Three, understanding that fully and empower and protect women, government must engage in a structured manner with widows and other stakeholders to fully address their cross-section of issues, so that if we are structured and we are very careful what we want to achieve and how, then we can be able to mark progress. To this end, the government of Kenya, therefore, has established one, a pioneering program for the widows through the Ministry of Public Service and Gender that is going to look at how widows can access more funding, but as a product that is not temporary, is going to be sustainable. Even when me and Diana Kamande are long gone, this program stays or product. Two, widows in Kenya, they have found space for political participation in local and the national government, and even they are going for elective positions. Three, financial inclusion through affirmative action. And four, deliberate effort for decent work for the widows. In Kenya, the impact of COVID-19 has been felt by the widows, and working with the blue government, we want to reach out the marginalized widows and support them during the impact of COVID-19, where we found poverty was being deepened. We also found there was an increased unpaid care work for the widows because the children were in school and everybody else was at home. And also, we decided to help them to support through the various organizations, and the government gave cash transfer to those vulnerable identified widows. They also got some safety nets in terms of food support just to cope with that situation. And moving forward, we are working how the government can also continue providing them with funding to either start and grow their small businesses. Therefore, as a government of Kenya, we are committed to, one, continue to lead on mainstreaming widows as a human rights issue that must be addressed at all levels as a government, both nationally and regionally. We will also continue to pioneer innovative solutions for financial inclusion movement into the formal sector by engaging the widows so that they can identify their challenge, they can own them, and we can implement them together and also be able to measure progress. Three, work with the government, other stakeholders, development partners, and other foundations to mainstream widowhood and provide them with the opportunities of access and inclusion now that we know their numbers. In conclusion, Chairperson, there is sufficient evidence to show that widows have a central role to play. If empowered and protected, they can contribute significantly to both economic and social development in our societies. A structured approach in dealing with the challenges holds the promise as we continue to support the widows so that they can have a better quality of life for themselves and their families. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Kobia, for your powerful intervention and for your commitment to continue to mainstream widowhood, to offer them with financial inclusion and innovative ways in which they can return to the formal sector, and to work with your government and other stakeholders to continue to mainstream this. Indeed, it's important for us to continue to allow them to have dignified work and access to capital, as it's the first request that they have in order to be able to secure their families. I thank you so much for your participation here today. We have approximately 10 minutes left in our session, and we'd love to open a few questions up for our panel. Perhaps if I could offer the floor to my colleague and perhaps matron of the movement, let's invite Miss Margaret Owen of Widows for Peace Through Democracy. Margaret. Margaret, are you able to hear us?
Can you hear me or can you see me?
We can hear you, Margaret. Please go ahead.
Right. I have been working, this has been the most incredible meeting. I'm just overwhelmed and absolutely amazed at everything that you're doing in Sierra Leone, particularly. And also fantastic to hear about what is happening in Kenya. I've been working on widowhood issues for over 30 years. I became a widow 31 years ago when I was teaching as an international human rights lawyer, magistrates, judicial administration. And one of them had a sick baby. And we brought his wife and baby to London because I could get her into hospital. And the first thing she said to me when she came into my room in my London house was, "You mean your husband's brothers let you stay here and keep all these things?" I was teaching a course on law, women, development and health in America in the School of Public Health at UCLA in 1993, and no one was talking about widows. The very first international workshop I gave was at Beijing at the Fourth World Conference of Women. I am full of admiration for everything that Heather Ibrahim Leathers has done to do much more than I have ever been able to do to get widows on the international agenda. It's absolutely extraordinary. Here we are at the end of the first week of the 65th Commission on the Status of Women. And we are all of us working on widows and understanding how absolutely crucial it is to address their status, since there will be no achievement of the social development goals, even no peace, no stability, no reduction in hunger or poverty, unless we address the status of widows. But just before I came into this extraordinary meeting, I've been talking with my own government, with my UK mission in New York. And I'm asking, and I ask all of you, the question. She says there is a lot of support for that Africa group initiated by Sierra Leone. But all the time, each time we look at the revisions, Heather, I know, is as distressed as I am. I, in my old age, weep. It's out. It keeps going in and it's rejected and it's out. And it's absolutely incredible because never before in all world history has we seen such an exponential increase in the numbers of widows of all ages. Not just now due to HIV and AIDS, not just now due to conflict and terrorism, natural disasters, but also now, as Heather has said, to COVID-19, which is a widow maker. And I'm appalled that in the draft of the agreed conclusions, even in that paragraph about COVID, they never mention that COVID, which is killing more men than women, is creating more and more widows of all ages.
Thank you, Margaret.
I can't speak anymore, but I must ask you and tell you all, please, that Widows for Peace to Democracy has a dossier which is the evidence of all this discrimination against widows. You can go into our website and you can see that dossier, and we will not give up. We all support the African group. The UK supports it, the US supports it. We've got to know a week today that widows are back. It's not fair that there are older women, HIV, migrant women, and young women, old women. Widows must be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret, so much. Please allow me to ask Honorable Minister Tarawali and Honorable Minister Kobia for your thoughts regarding the omission of widowhood in the agreed conclusions. And then I would love Ambassador Kaba and Ambassador Idris's thoughts as well. Please, Madam Cabinet Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think Margaret has raised a very important question that an important area can be overlooked just because maybe inclusion in the participation that was not flagged out. I think since the CSW is still continuing, I think we need to have an action injected in the final agreed document. I think when we are talking about such a big percentage of people affected by widowhood, then we cannot afford to leave it in CSW without it being flagged for a very clear, measurable action that we will continue having it. The good thing of inclusion in CSW65, that means then it will not be pulled out moving forward. And that's how we can keep our issue on the table if we are vocal about it. And we would have to make no apologies. We would have just to make a justification, and we hope it can be included. We still can petition for it to be included. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Kobia. Minister Tarawali, we would welcome your thoughts on the omission.
I think we're all saying the same thing. I think the advocacy must continue. I mean, we know that the numbers are increasing. We're hearing the data. I mean, the same, I mean, in terms of African countries with the Ebola, the numbers increase. Now with COVID, the numbers are increasing again. With wars, the numbers are increasing. So we know that the numbers are high. And I think it's been on the back burner for a bit, you know, but now the awareness is here, and we're galvanizing support. And I think with that support, we need to raise our voices. We need to do the advocacy. All of us need to do our internal work, and we need to push with the advocacy because it's important. I mean, when we're talking about in Sierra Leone, for instance, we talk about having a lot of street children. And when you go back to the origination of all of that, is because people are, you know, sort of, they've got widows. The widows cannot handle the you know, sort of being the head of the household with no support, no training, no, you know, sort of financial inclusion, and that sort of problem. And so it's a ripple effect. So we need to, you know, raise our voices and make that change.
Thank you, Minister Tarawali. Ambassador Kaba, you and your mission have been working tirelessly to bring forth these amendments and insertions of widowhood to the agreed conclusions, and you successfully lobbied the Africa group. How have you, you know, what are your thoughts on the reason for its exclusion?
Well, let me just put it in wider context here, that every time a new issue is introduced in the UN system, it takes an uphill battle. The key is what Minister Travel said, you know, that we need to intensify the advocacy. And that is what we've been doing. We are doing cross-regional outreach. And once you hear all those voices, not just from the Africa group, from Latin America, the Caribbean, the Asia Pacific areas, you know, that's how you build the momentum and the resistance disappears. You know, as an activist in my previous life, I know that you don't wait for others to do for you what you must do for yourself. You have to smash the table. You have to have a seat at the table. And this issue is not going to go away. I'm confident that we are going to make significant progress to make sure that more and more member states are aware. Indeed.
And Ambassador Idris, you were first to be able to include widowhood in the agreed conclusions years ago. And this year we've not been able to do that. Is there a thought or a reason, or is it systemic? Is it unsystemic? What are your thoughts? Ambassador Idris,
we need to unmute.
You unmute?
Yes, very dear Heather, thank you very much. And really, let me again express utmost thanks and appreciation for all who share their time and thought in this important event. And what we listen to is really very moving and very stimulating for further thoughts and further action. So we look forward that we regain our, we move again from virtuality to reality, and again to meet together in other further occasions. And of course, I tend to think that this is not only events which happen in CSW, but these are, CSW is a landmark just to take stock and to share lessons and experiences and to move forward. But of course, our work continues, and we look forward for more tangible results and more concrete actions and more fruitful effort in this very important dimension. And again, thank you so much, Heather, and for everyone and for the fund for really giving this important issue, which is very important to all of us, to give it due attention and also due action on the ground. Thank you very much. And again, happy CSW.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Idris. And I echo your voice, and of course, Ambassador Kaba's voice, that indeed it takes advocacy, and reiterating what Minister Tarawali had said as well. It takes advocacy, 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 and you have the support of the 100 organizations that I represent through the Alliance for the Last Woman First Global Alliance to bring forth those changes, and so we will support in every way. I'd like to offer the floor now to our charge d'affaires from the mission of Liberia to the United Nations. Mr. Davies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heather. It is a pleasure to join in this very, very important event convened by the Permanent Mission of Sierra Leone, headed by an astute diplomat who has permitted me to refer to him as a big brother. Not surprisingly, you heard a lot from Ambassador Idris about Ambassador Kaba's contribution to our engagements here at the United Nations. I respectfully recognize our great speakers, including my own Minister of Gender, Children and Social Protection, Honorable Sadie Ta. Thanks, Minister, for your enlightening comments. Allow me to use this occasion to highlight the appreciation and laudable work of the Global Fund for Widows. I was very pleased to have exchanged views with Madam Heather, who is so passionate about her work. Heather, you are wonderful and doing a great job. Your work brings pride and upliftment to widows. You help them regain their confidence, particularly in their public life. The issue regarding widows is not unique to Liberia. Nonetheless, it is a critical concern for us. As Minister Tar alluded to, a number of factors have contributed to the rise in the number of widows in Liberia. For this meeting, I will just mention two. One, our prolonged civil upheaval, which claimed the lives of many young and adult men who largely perpetrated the war. Two, that everyone has almost mentioned here, Ebola and coronavirus epidemic. To date, we have about 3,000 out of the 6,000 Ebola survivors who are widows in Liberia. We appreciate a number of initiatives established to support widows, but we together need to do more to address the deplorable plight of widows, not just in Liberia, but the world over. These, we have noted, are amongst the hardships widows face. They lack economic empowerment, they face stigmatization, some of which was properly described by Diana Kamandi. Thank you so much. You couldn't have said it any better. Truly, widows are so often denied their property. They are rejected by family members and friends, even the communities. This is tough on widows. We can say a whole lot about this subject matter because it can encourage so many thoughts from diverse backgrounds. But due to time, we want to stop here and just suggest the following. We look forward to our continual financial support to widows. We feel that widows require our moral, emotional, and social support. Finally, as Minister Tar affirmed, Liberia looks forward to collaborating with the Global Fund for Widows, Women's World Banking, and Come Together Widows and Orphans to further this discourse. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Davies. We appreciate all that you're doing in Liberia for widows. In closing, I would like to thank the panelists today. It is a great honor for me to have this side event, this historic side event, be welcomed by Ambassador Kaba and to be chaired and led by Minister Tarawali, Minister Kobia, Mr. Mohammed Idris, Ambassador, my good friend, and Diana Kamande and Mary Ellen Iskandarian. You continue to inspire and leave me in awe every day. Global Fund for Widows is humbled by all of your support. And with that, I would like to turn the panel back over to Ambassador Ali Kaba, our Global Goodwill Ambassador for Widows in Peace and Security, to offer a closing statement. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much, Heather, for the work that you do here every day. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it is very clear from our discussions today that a comprehensive approach through multilateralism and cooperation in a collective manner is needed to address the issue of widows. We must make it as a matter of urgency to take stronger action to achieving a defining framework for the change we want for our widows worldwide. In my capacity as president of the UN Women Executive Board, I call on all of you to join us, promote the issue of widows worldwide, and to do all we can to reduce the overwhelming barriers that widows face in terms of living successful and productive lives. UN Women need sustained political will from all member states, unwavering cooperation from civil society, international organizations, community leaders, partners, and all of us to change the narrative on widows. Let us rise up to shift the paradigm for our widows. Let us translate rhetoric into action for pragmatic results. We must pave the way for the future we want for widows, a future without poverty, without hunger, without gender-based violence, without sexual harassment, without discrimination in all of its forms. A future where widows will create resilient businesses that can bounce back from crisis, a future where they can have access to technology, a future where they can use their own bank cards to withdraw funds, pay back loans, invest in profits, and a future where they can be treated as equals and treated with dignity and respect. A future where they will have real protection from all the perils of inequalities in society. Widows have the power to end extreme poverty if they are given the chance to do so. This is the promise of the Platform for Action, and I believe that it still remains a powerful source of our guidance and inspiration. Let me end, distinguished colleagues, by underscoring the need to support widows to raise their self-esteem, amplify their ingenuity, and become role models and leaders. We need to turn the 2030 agenda into a result for women and girls, yes, but also for widows. This is our time, and the widows need us more than ever to act fast on their behalf. They should not live their lives in resigned acceptance of life as usual. Concrete action is needed to bridge the remaining gaps between rhetoric and reality. Thank you. Merci. Shukran. Gracias. Shishe. Spasiba. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Enjoy and happy CSW.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Great
you,
pleasure and
Ambassador.
honor.
Thank
Forward
you.
ever.
Thank
Backward
you,
never.
Tarawale. Thank you, Minister Kobia. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Davies.
Thanks to the ministers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.